Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Red Zone. Today, we are hosting a webinar, How to Optimize Plant Performance in 3 Steps. I ask that individuals put their phones on mute to limit any disruption during the webinar. And please use the webinar chat function to submit any questions that you might have. Our host will address those questions, at least as many as possible, at the end of the presentation and as time permits. Again, good afternoon. My name is Dennis Nash, President of Control Station. I am joined today by Dr. Bob Rice. Dr. Bob is highly regarded for his expertise in the fields of regulatory and advanced process control. As Vice President of Engineering here at Control Station, Dr. Rice oversees our technology and services innovation efforts. He will be leading today's presentation and addressing questions at the tail end of the presentation. With that, I hand the stage over to Bob Rice.
Excellent. So thanks for joining me this afternoon. And today what I'm going to talk to you guys about is the life cycle behind process optimization, control loop monitoring, control performance monitoring, and so forth. And try not to just focus on the execution phase of deploying and monitoring control loops, but how do you actually make the whole life cycle successful of an optimization project? And a lot of times this term life cycle gets thrown around without any, definition behind it. And I really want to spend some time defining all the different steps to actually make sure that this journey of process optimization is successful. And it's not just about the software that you choose and the staff that you have. It's actually putting down all the foundational work to make sure what you do is successful, right? And there's been a lot of studies, especially during the last few years, during the pandemic, about 70% of manufacturers are actually investing heavily in technology-based solutions to do process optimization, analytics, and so forth. And we all know that in our manufacturing sites, PID-based control is really a good place to start when you're trying to understand opportunities for improvement, increasing throughput, all those wonderful things. So where do you actually start on this journey? And you start all journeys with discovery, right? What is it that you actually have at your sites? And this is an interesting step because when you're going out to your sites, you may not exactly know all the different assets, all the different equipment, all the PID loops, all the motors, all the valves, all that stuff that you actually have in place, right? You're constantly swapping out instrumentation and valves and motors. You've got PID controllers that may have been deployed 10 years ago that are no longer actually being used. You can actually start to look through some of your HMI screens and start to find PID loops or assets or things that are actually not even in use anymore. And so starting this journey is a very basic step, which is you should document what you have at your manufacturing site. What are the process control assets that you actually have that are being used? Not only part of that discovery is documentation, right? It's not just documenting the assets, it's what is the purpose? What is the narrative? What is that control loop supposed to do? How is it supposed to respond? When is it supposed to respond? All these things are part of discovery, right? And it's not a simple task because a lot of times the PNIDs or the HMIs, the documentation, and all the gray matter that was used to build and construct and maintain this plant maybe has retired. And so you don't have access to all that information, right? I've definitely been to manufacturing sites where the expert has retired and half the people there don't even know what certain pieces of equipment do, what certain pieces of control logic do within the DCS or PLC, and that documentation was never created in the first place. So you have to spend a lot of time starting at the beginning and doing a little bit of controller rationalization, right? You have to do the same thing with alarms and events. You kind of have to do the same thing with all your controllers. What are the controllers that you have? Which ones are being used? And then start to define how are they being used? How should they be used? What is the performance requirements of that? Should they be fast? Should they be slow? Should they be tracking this? Should they be responding to certain disturbances? And you start to lay out a playbook for how your plant is supposed to operate. Without a playbook and an understanding of all the equipment, all the assets, all the things that you have there, you're going to be hard pressed to actually do your optimization, to execute the project if you don't know what it is you actually have at your site. So when we talk a little bit about recommendations, what we're thinking about are conducting that comprehensive site survey. All right, you really have to spend the time and do the groundwork to define what are all the things that you have there. I've been through so many loop optimization projects and loop audits where we start looking at things, we start looking at controllers that are on the HMI, only to find out, oh yeah, that FinFEN was decommissioned 3 years ago and no one ever said anything, right? Meanwhile, the poor DCS is trying to control a loop that doesn't actually physically exist in there, and the poor operators are trying to make that thing behave even though it doesn't exist. So conducting those site surveys is really important, especially for older sites and older factories. Try to establish a standardized naming convention. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but standardization and understanding what kind of conventions you use for naming things is important. It's boring, but it's really important. When you start looking through your historian or your DCS, having a standardized naming convention is really going to pay dividends later on, right? Understanding the names of things and having those standards allows documentation to be easier, so the next person that takes control over this project after you get promoted because you've done a wonderful thing will actually have a good understanding of what everything is, so they don't have to start from scratch again. Implement change management, right? You're running these sites and you need to make sure that you deploy an effective change management system so that in 2 years from now or a year from now, when pumps inevitably get swapped out or instrument changes, that you follow a process. So now all this pre-work that you've done is a living document, it's a living process that grows with your plant. So you're not constantly having to throw everything away and start over again. By deploying and managing these systems, you can really start to have a growing wealth of information and knowledge about how your plant operates. So 5 years from now, 10 years from now, all this material is updated. Next is utilize technology, right? You should not be documenting all this in a spiral bound notebook that you carry around with you, right? That may be a temporary solution, but that document needs to live in some sort of automated database, utilizing backups and sharing between different users, so everybody can contribute on the documentation, and you can automate a lot of this stuff. So when somebody says, hey, look, I've implemented a new valve, certain work orders, certain things can be spawned off to say, hey, look, somebody needs to update the DCS, the tag numbers need to change, calibration, configuration, all that stuff kind of flows. And so now you've got an automated process and it becomes easier to maintain. And of course, you always want to do the trust but verify. You do want to make sure you conduct those periodic audits and reviews to make sure that information is still up to date, right? So this is just laying the groundwork, which is, what is it that we have? How many loops do we have? How many assets do we have? What are the goals? What's the narratives? What are the objectives? What is it we're trying to achieve? Document that, define it, so you have that living guide to how your process is supposed to operate. What are all the assets that you have? So you have that catalog and you've defined, okay, here's all my bits and pieces. Now we need to actually start executing and performing optimization, identifying low-hanging fruit, identifying baselines. And this is really where control loop monitoring tools like PlanESP and others can really start to understand, where are your opportunities? Where are your low-hanging fruit? What's the baseline? Where do you have opportunities for improvement, right? You've defined all the equipment at the beginning. Now you got to go and fix all of it. And that's what execution is all about. This is where tools, software analytics, trending packages, PID tuning packages help you to provide that optimization to your plant. You need to make sure that you have the time and resource through your staffing or through your partners to be able to perform this optimization, right? You've got targets, you've got opportunities at all your PID loops, all your pieces of equipment, And you have to be able to track them, identify them, and improve the performance of it. Because your plants are complicated, your dynamics are changing. How your plant behaved, 10 years ago or 5 years ago when you were commissioning versus now could be very different. It could be seasonal. It could be based off of, products or grades that you're running through the equipment. And so how your process operates is going to change. You've defined all the goals and objectives. Now you need to start executing and driving optimization towards your sites. So how do we address this, right? What are some of the tools that we can use? Well, you can really start to understand your process narratives, that first step, but then you can start to employ things like advanced process control or even, advanced regulatory control, like applying cascaded loops, feed forward, adaptive, getting a better understanding of things. When you start to look at how the control narratives were built maybe 10 years ago, experience can help you identify better opportunities putting in split range control, right? And sometimes it just takes a new set of eyes to be able to identify the opportunity, right? I was working on a set of control loops the other day where they had two PID loops controlling the same system, and what should have been a split range controller was actually two completely separate loops moving the outputs, and they're fighting each other. They're causing instability in the temperature and wide swings, and that's the way it's always been until you start looking at the analytics and looking at the opportunities. You don't necessarily see those. So being able to identify them and start executing and deploying more advanced regulatory control things like split range control and cascade can really start to improve it. So you define better control objectives. Then you can start to kind of collaborate across different divisions within your company, whether you work better with, work with the operations team, work with maintenance, with instrumentation, the process engineering, the control engineers, to be able to take and bring in all of their knowledge to start elevating the overall performance of your facility, right? So you start to get more accurate data and more comprehensive data. And then you can start to dedicate resources to start solving problems. And those could be internal resources, those can be external resources, they could be equipment limitations. Now that you've started to identify where the low-hanging fruit are, you can start to assign resources to correct that, right? A lot of times there's a lot of drive, but there's not a lot of power behind your engineering team to get this done, right? Everybody is overworked. They have too many projects as is, and having tools tell you there's 20 other things that need to be fixed is all well and good, but you do need to be able to allocate resources to fix those things. And that's where partners like Control Station can come in and start helping you identify opportunities for optimization, help you deploy and understand these new control techniques, help you understand where your equipment limitations may be able to help you identify what opportunities you have by improving the performance of a PID loop, or changing the control strategy, or maybe decreasing pump speed or increasing pump speed, or changing valves or changing instrumentation design. Stuff like that can really help you improve it, and being able to bring in additional resources to help can really alleviate that kind of gap that you may have from an engineering standpoint. Then prioritize your objectives and constraints, right? You don't want to boil the ocean. There's a lot of challenges when you start to deploy loop monitoring or loop analytics or any types of analytics. You may end up with a gigantic list of things that you need to correct, and it can seem overwhelming. And you really need to prioritize those objectives. Don't try to tune every single loop in your facility in a week or a month or even a year sometimes. You need to prioritize and take gradual changes to be able to show improvement, right? You don't want to do everything all at once because you're never going to be able to get that done. You're just going to set yourself up for failure. So be realistic in your expectations when you start to execute on these projects. Don't expect to tune 20 control loops a week every week for forever, right? You've got a million other things going on. Try to set realistic expectations for improvement. So prioritize, understand the objectives, understand what is important. Remember, at the very beginning of this, when we went to the discovery phase, we've defined and identified all the loops, all the equipment, all the things, and you could start to prioritize applications there. So when you start to execute and identify, you've already set the objectives and the importances of the individual assets and control loops. So now your recommendations can lean on that. That's why that beginning stage is so important, to define all of the equipment, all the applications that you may have. Then it's all about continuous monitoring and improvement, right? Execution and optimization is not a single thing and you're done. It's a continuing journey, right? You got to continually execute and maintain that. So using continuous monitoring packages like Plan ESP to be able to use those types of analytic tools to constantly track, to maintain your performance of your facilities, to make sure they're running as best as possible, is really important to being able to execute on that. Trying to use Excel spreadsheets or other things is a very manual and tedious task. And let's be honest, it sounds great for about the first month or two, but after about 6 months and you've done a great job, you move on to the next role. Now the next person gets your, I'm sure a amazingly documented Excel spreadsheet. Well, they're not going to use it, and then all that work is going to go to the wayside. So you want to make sure you invest in tools that are maintained by outside resources so they can continue to be updated. The documentation is there, and you're not required to be constantly maintaining and bug fixing your own internal products. The next is sustain it. All right. You've done all the optimization. Now what? Now you got to hold it there, right? Which really comes down to that last bullet from the last slide there, which is we want to have the tools to continuously maintain those types of those optimization efforts that we've had. So sustaining this is the long-term kind of resource that you have to apply to these things. You got to make sure you build standard operating procedures. You got to make sure that these tools are well documented, that there's internal training that's conducted on the optimization efforts that you've done, so everybody is aware of it, so they can continue to make sure that the work that you put in is maintained, right, is held. Additionally, we all have to deal with management change and organizational restructuring, which always changes the priorities, right? Every year there's a new a goal for the company, right? And a new focus, and you may have only gotten halfway through the last goal before now they've changed it, right? And now you're constantly chasing that cheese. So you need to make sure that you stay ahead of where the goals are, and you keep documenting, you maintain and keep that push going on your optimization efforts to make sure that they're still there, right? I don't count success as a successful execution, right? Anybody can execute a project. Sustaining tools in the long term, that's success, right? Talk to me in 5 years. If you're still using the process that was deployed 5 years ago and still generating value out of it, that is a successful execution, right? That is a successful project, to be able to sustain those things, because always your goals are changing. The economic uncertainties, budget constraints, cost cutting, right? All optimization efforts, all tools, they cost money, right? So you have to constantly prove that these tools are generating value. And the only way you can constantly do that is to sustain the use of them, to make sure that they are actually being used, that you are documenting the successes that you have, that you've built the procedures in place, and that you've built a workflow so that it becomes natural for the position, right? So every week or every month, there's work being done, work being documented, right? Value being maintained. It doesn't have to be gigantic value every month. It can just be that steady stream of improvement is always going to make sure these projects maintain their success over the long haul, versus just being a one and done type of project. It's great, it's there, you're on to the next one. So what are some of the recommendations here to be able to sustain these? Right. Number one is probably the hardest one, which is try to establish a culture around optimization that values innovation and efficiency and all these wonderful things. Changing culture at sites can be a real challenge, right? Sometimes people don't want to change the way they do things. They may see it as an encroachment on their job or their self-worth, right? So you need to start to really drive culture that shows that using tools Driving optimization is good for everybody, right? It can make the job easier. It can make it more sustainable. Can it make it more profitable? And if a business is profitable, companies will invest in profitable businesses, right? They'll allow them to grow. So you need to make sure you invest in a culture that actually appreciates these types of tools. Then you need to be in that continuous improvement mode, which is review and update, right? When you build SOPs, you build narratives, you build these documents, they are going to change, right? And if you don't update your SOPs, you don't keep them current, right, with new goals, new expectations, right? They're not gonna stay with the current workflow. You got to make sure they stay updated. You keep them aligned to whatever the current business goals are, right? Sometimes just updating them to maintain the mission statement that you may have keeps them kind of fresh and keeps them in everybody's mind, right? The next is to make sure that you've maintained some sort of advanced analytic tools. You're taking advantage of state-based analytics. You're monitoring your controller performance, so you're sustaining those benefits, right? You may start on the execution phase where you've deployed loop monitoring and you've identified all the low-hanging fruit. Well, you can continue to refine those types of KPIs and metrics to be able to handle things like conditions and grades, where at the beginning you may have only been concerned with, hey, this loop is only behaving, is on average behaving pretty well. But as you start to sustain and you improve and you update your process to be more sophisticated, well, now you can start to take those KPIs and metrics and really drill down to say, okay, yes, this loop behaves well, but hey, we just brought a new product grade online and now that loop doesn't behave well. So let's take and analyze individual product grades or recipes or batches to be able to identify opportunities, right? So you're continually sustaining that type of performance. The next is communication, right? And the whole part of this life cycle, it's all about communication to sustain the optimization gains, right? Communicate what you've done, right? If you've gone out and you've done optimization on a loop, you've performed a miracle somewhere and things are behaving a lot better, document it and communicate it and share it. Show the worth of what you've done, show the worth of the optimization, right? Documenting all the successes is always going to be beneficial when showing the importance of the project that you've deployed, right? Even if it's little ones, if you just keep a trail of all the things that you've done and you keep that in a folder, that becomes your success folder. So when you're talking about, okay, why do we do this? Why do we put in 200 hours a year into this project? Well, this is why. These are the 30 things or 5 things or 10 things that we've made better over the last year, and those are the financial gains. Communicating those will show that there is value in maintaining it. If you've done amazing things and nobody knows, you really haven't done anything, right? You do have to propagate out that knowledge to make sure everybody is aware of the improvements that you've done. So to kind of summarize on what these kind of 3 goals are, right? When you're doing optimization, that kind of life cycle side, you have discovery, execution, and sustaining, right? You have to document everything. You have to lay out all the playbooks on how your plant is supposed to be operating. How many pieces of equipment do you have? All those things. Then you can execute on your optimization using CLPM solutions and so forth to be able to identify opportunities, create baselines, create your list of low-hanging fruit and optimization targets, and you can go and execute on those, right? But it's not, doesn't end there. You have to make sure you sustain it. Otherwise, the whole execution phase goes away, right? You've all seen trends where you apply optimization, and then short time later, all the optimization goes away. Then you do it again, and then it all goes away, right? If you can do it once and hold it, that's going to be the most bang for your buck. And that's really where a lot of effort has to be there, right? So what I'd like to do is answer any questions that you have. Hopefully this has been at least a little bit enlightening about the journey when you're talking about optimization. I know a lot of people tend to focus just on the execution phase. What are the tools? What am I going to do? What's that? But if you forget about the beginning and the end, you're not going to have a long-term successful program. Being able to identify all the pre-work that needs to be done and the post-work, the sustaining work that needs to be done. Those are very important parts. The execution is what gets most of the product documentation and literature, but the end, that's where the sweat and tears are laid down so you can have a successful project.
Great presentation, Bob. While you were speaking, a couple questions have been submitted, and I'll go through the two of them, starting with the first. Participant noted, we've already initiated an optimization initiative, but haven't formalized our goals. How does the framework you shared apply to our situation?
So that's an interesting question, and it's kind of like running a race with no finish line. If you haven't defined your goals clearly at the beginning, how do you know when you've actually reached them? And so what you're missing there is kind of that beginning pre-work to be able to define the narrative or the goal and the objectives of your optimization project. And so where I see that kind of project fitting in the framework that I've kind of outlined is you've jumped right ahead to execution without putting any of the discovery work at the beginning. And again, it's kind of that idea that discovery is, it's a challenge, but you have to lay out the goals and objectives very clearly. And it's a time-consuming and often challenging process. And that's really where you can leverage companies like Control Station and our partners to be able to go in and help you define what are the objectives, what are the baselines, what are the goals that you can accomplish, and what are the gains and benefits that you can expect to do by actually executing on this project. Because without those goals, how do you know when you've succeeded? How would you know when you've finished your execution and you can start moving into sustaining? So it's all about trying to lay that groundwork and leverage partners and experts in the field to help you kind of lay out what is possible, what are the objectives that you have and targets that you can try to achieve.
Great. Another question, one that we hear similar remarks from our customers. Bob, the question is, we've executed an approach similar to this, but on the reliability side of our operation, and are now investigating process optimization. What differences should we expect?
Those two types of initiatives are very, very similar. I'd actually talk to them. I'd explain them as twins, right? You know, reliability is all about identifying the equipment, monitoring the reliability, and sustaining that. And it follows the same type of thing for control loop optimization, control loop monitoring. Identify it, you know, do the execution, do the optimization, and the monitoring. And so that kind of reliability life cycle really mirrors the control loop performance monitoring life cycle that you would have associated with it. And it's a great parallel because there's been great strides and great documentation on the benefits of reliability monitoring, and you can really apply those same types of architectures to those benefits on the control loop monitoring side as well.
Well, that's great. I want to thank Dr. Bob once again for being the host of today's Inside the Red Zone. For those who have joined us in the past, the Red Zone is intended to be a short 30-minute session. So we focus on key attributes that participants can apply back at their production facility. And yet we welcome further interaction with you. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us. The QR code shown will bring you directly to the Control Station website. Additionally, we have recently published a white paper on this specific topic, and we will be circulating a PDF copy of the white paper to all registered participants. Thank you very much for joining Dr. Rice and me today. We appreciate your engagement, and we look forward to seeing you around the manufacturing scene.